Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. And yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. So let's just get right into this. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating. So, if you're not already at the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website listening online, we sure would appreciate it if you'd find your way over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website. Get signed up as a subscribing member, even if it's as little as $15, $20 a month. Every membership helps, and we do need the support of the audience to keep the broadcast network operating and the shows coming. And if you want to get fully informed on my favorite topic on this show every Thursday evening at 6, which of course is the maladministration of the income tax by the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, and yes, the federal judges of the lower courts for the last, 75 years, you need to find a way over to taxfreedom.com and start reading, get educated, because we don't have a tax system in the United States of America. None of the money goes to the Treasury, as required by law of all collected tax. So where's it go? It goes to the private corporation of the Federal Reserve Bank. Why is a private corporation cashing your so-called tax check? Don't believe me? Look at the back of what it says on the last check you wrote to the IRS. See if it says deposit to the U.S. Treasury is required by law. Or if it doesn't say something like pay to any FRB, Federal Reserve Bank. It's not a tax system. It's a peonage debt system. It has Americans endlessly working in slave labor to service the $37 trillion in debt that Congress has run up through the unconstitutional monopoly given to the Federal Reserve Bank on currency and credit. And we're seeing that play out today, aren't we? With the dichotomous economy that we have, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. But first, I wanted to mention, of course, that news today is the same as the news yesterday. The terrible murder of Charlie Kirk, who was literally assassinated in Utah for openly debating and using logic and reason to discuss politics, religion, life philosophy in general, and doing it very well because he was never angry, he never slandered anyone, he never threatened any violence. All he did was use a strong command of language, facts, statistics, and knowledge in the areas that he spoke about, and he was very convincing. He actually moved a lot of youth to support Trump, it would appear. So our deepest sympathies go out to his family. He didn't deserve that, and hopefully the FBI will track the guy down and put him on trial and execute him there in Utah. So there you have it. Just a terrible, terrible situation. And no one, I mean, the man wasn't even a politician. He's just a speaker on college campuses trying to educate the youth as to the other side of the coin, because they're certainly not getting much exposure to the conservative philosophy in school and college, where they're being taught nothing but liberal socialism, anarchy, chaos, violence. Oh yeah, and feelings. Feelings. A lot of talking about feelings now. No more math, no more reading, no more history. Reading, writing, arithmetic, nah, they're gone. They're gone. The statistics out are simply appalling. Simply appalling. You have math capabilities at grade level of like 22% of the entire United States population in public schools. 22% can do math at grade. It's 30% that can do reading at grade level. I mean, the public schools have been a complete failure. They've been perverted by the liberal left, the teachers' unions, which are running the schools for the teachers and the school administrators. They're not teaching education. They're teaching political, philosophical agenda and activism. And that's what we're seeing play out in Utah, right? It took 25 years, but here we are. Not even a politician. And they shoot him because they can't defeat him in debate. Oh my God. Okay, let's again move on. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, what we have now, as I've been saying for a while, is a dichotomous economy. You have two different realities developing in the United States, one on Wall Street and one on Main Street. I've been talking about for a year now how the Federal Reserve Bank has denied Main Street America access to capital by keeping the interest rates and the mortgage interest rates correspondingly way too high for Americans to be able to afford access to capital. Meanwhile, over on Wall Street, the economy is booming. And the Federal Reserve, how much is it booming? Well, today the Dow went over 46,000 for a new record. The S&P went over 6585 for a new record. The Nasdaq went over 22,000 for a new record. Gold is at $36.75, $3,675 an ounce. That's pretty close to. And silver is at $42 an ounce. It seems like just 3 months ago it was at 28, but here silver's at 42. So the Wall Street investments are just rolling. The stock market is booming. They've got no problem with access to capital because that's where the 10 trillion they issued under COVID went, is to the institutions. And here they are backing it up. So you got two different economies. On Wall Street, the country is booming. But the Federal Reserve Bank has been watching the job reports, saying that the job production has been too hot to allow them to lower interest rates. And of course, it just came out that the job reports for all of 2024, Biden's last year, had to be revised down again, the largest amount in history. 911,000 jobs eliminated, which they said existed under Biden. They lied about his economy, and this is after 875,000 jobs got eliminated the year before. So Joe Biden lost 1.7 million jobs in his last 2 years in office. Trump got handed basically on Main Street a dead economy. No access to capital, overwhelming debt, and no jobs, which the Fed was saying their jobs reports are too strong, so we can't lower interest rates. Of course, it was all a fraud. The data is just made up. It's an old system by paper survey? You got to be kidding me. You don't know how to use the internet? Or the ADP processing data? Good God. So the Federal Reserve Bank has been completely out of touch, just like Donald Trump has been saying for the last 2 years. Completely out of touch. They're watching the wrong indicators. They're ignoring the reality on Main Street and focusing on the disreality of Wall Street, where the speculation is running rampant. And as I said, all three market indices hit new records today: 46,000, 6,500, and 22,000. And what's more, with the job reports being lowered by 911,000, that means the Fed doesn't have the excuse anymore, and it's now obvious to everyone how late to the party Jerome Too Late Powell is. So they're going to have to cut interest rates probably 0.5 point, and that's going to kick the stock market into high gear as more money pours into the market and moves out of the lower interest rate instruments. So, Fed has been watching the wrong thing. Trump was absolutely right about this. His attempts to get the Fed to lower the interest rates, to make capital available to Main Street, to make mortgages more available, to help recover the stumbling real estate market, which, because of the high mortgage rate interest, is stalled. Sellers don't want to sell because they have to take a higher mortgage, and buyers can't afford the higher mortgage to buy. So buyers are being locked out, and sellers are turning away because they have to look at what they got to do to move somewhere else, and that doesn't look good if you don't get enough cash out of what you sell to move on and buy in cash the next place. So they got yeah, that's a pretty good, and that's it is well, we'll talk about that in the next session. So you got a dichotomous economy in America right now. Wall Street is booming, Main Street is suffering. Trump is the only politician in the country trying to help Main Street. Congress is just trying to get out of the way, and of course, with their focus now, it's always an emergency with them, isn't it? What they have to do now is get a continuing resolution in place in like the next 10 days. So either that or the government has to close down, and both parties are already starting to blame the other one. Oh, the Republicans insist on this, and the Democrats won't compromise on anything, will they? That's why they can't get together and agree on anything, is because Democrat positions are intractable and unrealistic. They want open borders, not controlled immigration. They want to give money to illegal aliens, not citizens. They want to let criminals out without bail so that they can't murder people or keep assaulting them. I mean, the Democrats, none of their positions. They want lower prices on gasoline. No, they want higher prices on oil. It's like just insane. Nuclear energy. Let's do nuclear energy so that we can have nuclear power plants produce the electricity needed for the AI. No, Democrats don't want any nuclear power. Well, they ain't going to do it with windmills and solar panels, let me tell you that. So you have a dichotomous reality. Democrats, I told you before, the Democrat Party doesn't really exist anymore. It's already been transformed into the Socialist Party of America. It's under authority and control of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Mamdani, an actual avowed communist, is now the party darling, thinking they're going to win in New York. We'll have to see if there are actually that many idiots in New York willing to vote for communism, which can never happen in New York. I mean, the Constitution guarantees a Republican form of government. What, New York City is going to be exempted from that so they can have a socialist form instead? And we've already seen how the stuff works out, right? They tried opening city-run grocery stores in Kansas City. It doesn't work out. The city isn't capable of running a grocery store. Grocery store is an incredibly difficult operation. They operate on like a 1.5-point margin. 1.5%. If anything goes wrong, they lose money. You're going to tell me the state, which can't balance its budget, is going to manage a business with a 1.5% margin? And of course, when the state runs it, the whole point is to get rid of the margin, isn't it? So that you can pass the food through to the customers at the lowest possible price. Well, guess what? That ain't happening. Not with the city running it. The only way that happens is if you let the stores manage their own affairs. And the only way it happens in the poor neighborhoods is if the political leadership stops the crime. Because the stores are leaving the crime-ridden neighborhoods, which means downtown, where the police aren't reacting to crime. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I hear that first commercial break coming up, so we'll be back in 5 with more. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into this here. Now, for the last few weeks, I've been talking about how the federal income tax has to fall because of the Supreme Court's decision in Moore, which says the income tax is not a direct tax under the 16th Amendment. It's an indirect tax under Article 1, Section 8. And that means there's no basis for using gross income for taxing the American people, because using gross income was part of the direct application of a taxing power that was allegedly unlimited under the 16th Amendment. And the Supreme Court says no such power exists. It's been a fraud since World War II. The labor of the American people is not taxed by impost, which taxes foreign activity, foreign imports, and in foreign places. It's not taxed by duty, which taxes exported goods. And it's not taxed by excise, which only taxes commodities, licenses, and corporations. So when the direct basis goes away, so too does the allegation and the ability to argue in court in front of a jury that the federal government is authorized to tax the labor of the American people in the 50 states. It's absolutely unconstitutional, and the founding fathers would be aghast, just simply aghast, to learn that their republic has devolved into the socialist state that exists under a system where every single time a citizen earns $1, the government is owed a piece of it. Under a system of direct, unlimited, non-apportioned taxation of all sources of gross income, when no such power has ever existed. So the tax on income has to fall. It doesn't work. It's unconstitutional. It's been a fraud. And neither the tax nor the IRS are going to be able to withstand the coming tidal wave of revolutionary fury when the people find out what's been done to them by the federal judges, who are the ones that made up the communistic enforcement of the income tax under the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, rather than the constitutional enforcement of an indirect tax on foreign activity, imports, exports, licenses, and corporations. So it's got to go. And you can't have a flat tax because that's unconstitutionally direct. You can't have a sales tax, federal sales tax or VAT tax, because that invades the exclusive legislative and territorial prerogatives of the state governments to tax retail sales. And you can't have what they call a fair tax, because that's just another name for a sales tax at the federal level, taxing every transaction that occurs at 25%. Yeah, right, check. All of these proposed alternatives are completely unconstitutional, and they won't fund the government or operate. The only way to fund the government properly is to tax the corporate earnings. They're the ones making all the money today, not the citizens. They need to tax corporate revenue, earnings, not profit. All earnings subject to a tax between 3.5% and 5%. Every single company, every single month, send it in. Or on a quarterly basis, send in 5% of everything you made. That become no income tax, no taxation on the citizens. They get to keep 95% of their paycheck. They're still going to take out Social Security for a while. But citizens get to take home their entire paycheck so they can pay their bills and afford to live in this new paper-inflated economy the government has created under Biden and COVID, when they printed out, another $20 trillion in debt. So, the income tax has got to fall. It needs to be replaced with a corporate flat tax on all revenues of 5% every company. Now that funds the legitimate operation of the government. The next thing you have to do is eliminate the waste, the fraud, and the unconstitutional spending. And there's actually a way to do that. But you can't do it as long as the federal government is in charge of everything. You just can't do it. Government, every office always needs more money every year, more money every year. And of course, as long as the Federal Reserve Bank sees the American people being willing to be enslaved and have their labor collateralized for $37 trillion, the bank will keep lending Congress into oblivion. 40, 50, 60 trillion. As goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation and the quality of life of its people. You will all be living in caves if you do not address this and stop the reckless printing of the dollar into oblivion. How do you do that? Well, why don't you identify all the departments in the government that are not constitutionally authorized to exist? You know, like the Department of Agriculture, that's a state function. The Department of Commerce, that's a state function. Interstate commerce is no longer a thing. You don't need a Department of Commerce. It can be a 12-man office in the Department of the Interior. Labor. Where is labor under authority of the federal government? The Department of Labor is unconstitutional. Health and Human Services. Where is that in the Constitution? Where is medical insurance in the Constitution? Where is health care? Where is medicine? Where are doctors? None of this is in the Constitution. HUD. Where is housing in the Constitution? That's a state function. DOT, transportation. Really? Really? The federal government's in charge of transportation? You're kidding. That's a state function too. Where's the Constitution say the government's in charge of transportation? It doesn't. How about energy? Nope, that's not there either. Education? Nope, that's not there either. The Environmental Protection Agency? Nope, that's not there either. All of these are state functions, not federal. OSHA? Same thing. Every single one of these departments of the government shouldn't exist. And the way you solve your debt problem is you eliminate these agencies which should not exist. And you take the collective budget for all of them and you slash it by 10%. And then you distribute that slashed collective budget to the 50 states proportionate to the census, so that each state will get their portion of that money. And then all 50 states will have money to spend on these areas: agriculture, commerce, labor, health and human services, housing, transportation, energy, education, environmental, as each state's legislature deems most important and necessary in their state. So that you'll have spending coming from all 50 capitals instead of just one source of spending, the federal government. You need to be distributed with the spending in order to stimulate economy. Because when the federal government spends the money, it doesn't stimulate economy. It just makes the institutions that win the one national contract wealthy and rich. You want proof? Okay, let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about what happened with the, where do I have this? Let's talk about what happened with the rural internet bill that Biden and internet were raving about. And the Virginia governor candidate here was a big sponsor of, I forget her name, but they authorized spending $42 billion on hooking people up to the internet. Then they canceled the contract with the only company that was actually doing it at a reasonable cost, Starlink, because Elon Musk owns Starlink. So they didn't want him hooking people up for $1,000 a pop. So they spent $42 billion and never actually hooked up anybody. And the few people that they did hooked up were hooked up at a cost of over $100,000 a household. That's what happens when your government spends the money. Nobody gets hooked up and $42 billion disappears down the drain. How much more, how much better could the states have done if they were given that money to implement rural connectivity in their own state with local companies? Oh, but it didn't happen. Congress is not representing, it's ruling. It's not using these budgets to help, it's using them to usurp and take control and authority. And it's done so through the regulatory deference provided by Chevron that has literally allowed the socialist deep state bureaucracy to write their own laws in place of what Congress provided in the statutes. They've just been making it up. That's where liability for the direct tax under the 16th Amendment comes from. They just made it up in a regulation that goes beyond what the statute actually does. Section 1 imposes a rate of tax on taxable income. So how is anybody made liable under regulations for a rate of tax on taxable income? There's no tax on the person. Taxable income means constitutionally subject to an impost, a duty, or an excise. And there is no basis for any of those powers to apply to the domestic labor of the American people conducted within the 50 states. It doesn't exist. It's a false authority invented by the same court that gave you Korematsu, which was the decision that let the United States government lock up all the Japanese without a trial or due process or cause or evidence. Just lock them up because we're paranoid and afraid that they might be a problem. You gotta be kidding me! How criminal was that court? Every bit as criminal as the Glenshaw Glass Court that said Section 61 was Congress exercising its power to tax all accessions to wealth. Where the hell did that come from? Where does the Constitution say Congress has power to tax all accessions to wealth? The only way to get there is to claim fraudulently that the 16th Amendment authorizes a new power to tax without limitation, directly and without limitation. Well, where's the enabling enforcement clause in the amendment to authorize Congress to write new law for that new power? It doesn't exist. The whole thing's a constitutional fraud from top to bottom. It always has been. They've just used the boiling or the frog in the cool pot of water on a hot fire theory to slowly cook the American people as they got them into the pot in World War II with the victory tax and Social Security and kept them there afterwards with pressing the Social Security and gradually began to heat up the water as the IRS pressed for more and more civil takings and criminal prosecutions for people that wouldn't cooperate with the enslavement of a non-apportioned direct tax imposed on everything they did in blatant violation of the Constitution. Blatant violation. The 16th Amendment didn't repeal or amend anything in Article 1, like Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, which requires all direct taxes to be apportioned to the several states for payment, which the Supreme Court reaffirmed. All direct taxes have to be apportioned. That means the enforcement of the income tax for the last 65 years as a direct tax without limitation has been a constitutional fraud. Straight up constitutional fraud. And it's the judges that have thrown the American people under the bus in this graduated class legislation that uses graduated tax brackets to divide the American people so they can never be represented again in their entirety by any politician, because each politician has to pick one class or the other. And now the class philosophies have become intractable. There's no common ground. Private property? No, it's all federal. Private wages? No, it's all federal. Interest, rent, dividends, bank accounts, compensation, tips, annuities. Where is any of this in the Constitution? Once you get rid of the direct tax on income, everything falls. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I think I hear the commercial break coming up again. We'll be back in 5 minutes with more on more and the solutions that we have in hand. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just jump right back into it. When we came up on the commercial break there, I was talking about how we can balance the budget, stop the deficit spending, and restore financial and economic and monetary order to our house. And the way to do it is to take away from the federal government the power to be the only one spending money in the country through Congress. We should eliminate the unconstitutional agencies, take their collective budget, and give it to the states so that each state can administer to the energy, the agriculture, the labor, the health, the transportation, the environment of its own people in its own state without being dependent upon a wasteful and nonsensical federal government that can't get a dime into economic production. I talked about how the rural internet spent $42 billion to hook up no one and canceled the contract with the one company that was doing it properly. You want another example? How about the $7.5 billion they spent for EV charging stations, which, of course, EV fad is dead. And they locked Tesla out of the EV. It was all political nonsense. They spent $7.5 billion, and as of the end of last year, I think they'd only built 128 stations. I understand now the number's up closer to 384. But 380 recharging stations for $7.5 billion? Anybody want to do the math? It's insane. The states are the ones that should be spending the money. You have to take the collective budgets of the unconstitutional agencies and slash them 10%. The states won't mind a bit that the budget's been slashed a whole 10%, because last year they didn't get a penny. And you continue doing that. Every single year you slash those collective unconstitutional agency budgets by 10% every year until the budget is balanced. The states won't mind. They'll get lots of money in the first couple of years to build the infrastructure to maintain the systems that they put in place to serve their people with the reduced funds they get in the later years, as every year the funds get reduced 10% till the entire budget is balanced. Now, the last part of the puzzle, of course, once you distribute the spending to the states, you have the ability to slash the budget every year till it's balanced, and nobody can complain and nobody can bitch. The federal government just does it. The states accept it. You get less than what you got last year, unless you vote for politicians that balance the budget, and then you get to keep your money. So the last part, of course, is you can't continue to use your welfare programs to buy votes from the insecure elderly or diseased or poor. These are systems that are supposed to be social safety nets. They're not entitlements for the upper middle class to rely on. Why are millionaires getting Social Security checks? Oh, they're over 64. So what? They have $1 million in net worth. Why are they getting welfare? And to make it worse, that millionaire is getting $3,500 a month. He doesn't need it. But meanwhile, the poor person that does need it, they're getting $600 a month and can't survive 3 weeks. It's all reversed. Instead of the poor getting the bulk of the resources and enough to survive month to month, the wealthy who don't need it are getting it. It's insane. It's a reverse welfare system. It steals from the poor and gives to the wealthy. And that's particularly true when you think about the fact that the poor, who most in need of the money, don't live much longer than 64 years old. So the poor who pay in their whole lives never actually draw anything because they die before they draw any money out. And this is true of both the poor and the minority populations. It's rigged to enslave you to the politicians' ability to buy the votes of the insecure elderly, whether they be black or white, although most of them turn out to be white because, as I say, the life expectancy of both the black man and the black woman are less than that of the white man and woman. Social Security was specifically designed around an eligibility age that was higher than the life expectancy of the black man. So, it's a fraud. It's used to enslave you. It's part of the mechanism that services the endless debt and allows the government to spend endlessly and corruptly on anything it wants to fund. So to fix this, you need to means test your recipients. You need to put in place a system of evaluating whether or not a recipient of Medicare or Social Security is actually needful of such assistance. And of course, anyone with $1 million net worth value, assets over liabilities of over $1 million, they're wealthy enough to pay for themselves, both living month to month and for medical care. All of their participation in Medicare and Social Security should be means tested. And once someone's net worth falls below a certain level, well, then Social Security starts kicking in a graded payment. So, like, I don't know, hypothetically, it falls below 500,000, you get 20%. Below 400, you get 40%. Below 300, you get 60%. Below 200, you get 80%. Below 100, you get 100% of your benefit. This way, nobody gets taxed out of their home and property, but people who have $1 million home don't get to live off of Social Security welfare when they should be selling their home and moving to a $200,000 condo. Why should the taxpayer be subsidizing the wealthy retired? You got to means test your recipients. You got to distribute the spending of the unconstitutional agencies to the state so that they can minister to their own affairs and won't be ruled by the deep state bureaucracy of the federal government, which has been using the Chevron doctrine to write its own laws, that has invaded and usurped the authority of every state legislature in the country on every single one of these agencies I just went through. Agriculture, commerce, labor, health, housing, transportation, energy, education, environment, occupational safety. Where is any of this? This is how they've come to rule you, is by creating these agencies without constitutional authority for them under some period of alleged emergency. Because these didn't exist in the beginning. Agriculture didn't come in until 1862 in the Civil War. Commerce is 1903. Labor is 1913. Health and Human Services is 1979. HUD is 65. Transportation 67. Energy is 1977, the Carter Energy Crisis. None of these are authorized by the Constitution. EPA 1970. Education 1979. None of these offices are authorized. They should all be eliminated. The monies collectively slashed by 10% and proportionately distributed to the states for them to administer to all of these areas within the state. States that need to focus on energy can. States that need to focus on education, which is everybody, could, without being dictated to by the federal government about teaching nonsense like gender studies in order to get federal funding. Which is the problem, right? They're not teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. They're not teaching, they're not educating. They're indoctrinating with political, philosophical agenda and hatred and violence. And an advocacy for socialism, which none of them have any idea at all what they're talking about. which is one of the things that Charlie Kirk was so effective at exposing. None of them have any idea at all what they're talking about. I'm not sure I could have done what he did without just breaking down and telling the people arguing this nonsense, you're an idiot! Absolute idiot! How can you utter this nonsense? And like I say, it's become intractable. There's no common ground anywhere. And you see it. Trump was a Democrat all his life. Elon Musk was a Democrat. They both say, well, we didn't leave the party left us. They went so far to the left that the center line moved. And people who were just left of center before, like Musk and Trump, are now just right of center. Because common sense is no longer acceptable on the liberal left side of public policy. It's our way or the highway. Racism, misogyny, Nazi. And of course, when it's the left committing the violence, those are just all projections of the Democrat Party, accusing the Republicans of doing what the Democrat Party is doing, which is just what they've been doing since the Trump first ran, right? When Hillary accused Trump of colluding with the Russians. And it turned out that's what Hillary was doing through a British spy, Christopher Steele. It was a Russian agent that made stories up for Christopher Steele and Hillary Clinton. All projection, all projection. Biden yelling Nazi, Nazi. He was the Nazi. He's the one that tried to make everybody take a COVID shot and fired people who wouldn't. Even those who had natural immunity, because the little Nazi didn't recognize immunity. His health service said, no, that 100-year medical tradition, it's out the window. Everything's new now under our regime. They just made it up, which is pretty much all the Democrat politicians have anymore. There's no truth or logic or reason in anything they say or position they take. It's all just emotional socialist nonsense. Give us all your money and we'll take care of you. Tax the rich out of existence and everything will be fine. Who needs the rich? Everybody will be poor, just like in Cuba, Russia, and China. Oh, except those connected to the government. They're all, for some reason, somehow, always rich. While the people sink deeper and deeper into an economic depression under the failure of any system like socialism that turns authority over to government for all aspects of life: food, shelter, housing, healthcare, transportation, energy, agriculture, environment, occupational safety. You want your world destroyed? You want your economic viability destroyed? Go ahead. Keep letting the deep state write their own laws. Fortunately, the Supreme Court has theoretically put an end to that with Loper-Bright, which terminated the Chevron doctrine. But the courts aren't adopting Loper-Bright. They're pursuing the enforcement of Chevron. The government gets to make it up. We don't have to tell you what statute says that. It's in the regulations. Just like they're still trying to argue, it doesn't matter if it's a direct tax or indirect. We have the authority to tax everybody's income. No, you don't. That claim was based on the claim it's a direct tax. When the direct tax goes away, you don't have the authority to tax everybody's income. Only the corporate person, the licensed person, the foreign person, the importer, the exporter, or in foreign places. Just like it says in the law, in the 1939 statutes at large that implemented the income tax, showed how it was implemented in the law 26 years after the law was written. 1939. It's all on the taxfreedom.com website. Get over there, get educated, start reading, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell the media, tell your politicians. They don't know what's going on. If they want to learn, they need to go read the website and find out. We'll be back next week with more. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network.